I thank you all for taking the time to participate in this webinar offered through University of Illinois Extension's Local Government Education Program. To ensure the best possible quality in our recording, microphones will be muted during the presentation. We do, however, encourage you to add questions in the chat space. If you have any problems connecting, you can add those questions to the chat space as well. I will view your comments and questions, and we will be able to respond and pose those questions to our presenter at the end of the presentation. So while you might have questions during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat box, but we'll refrain from questions to the presenter directly until the end. Today's webinar is on 5 strategies for attracting and retaining youth in rural communities, presented by Pam Schallhorn, Community and Economic Development Educator in Unit 23. Pam works with community leaders, economic development professionals, extension colleagues, and university faculty to develop programs that address local needs and mesh with border, state, and national interdisciplinary initiatives. She has a background in finance, small business development, downtown redevelopment, leadership, poverty alleviation, and diversity. She holds a master's degree in political studies from the University of Illinois Springfield and a bachelor's degree in finance and economics from Northern Illinois University in DeKalb. Since 2015, Pam has been assisting local governments and economic development organizations in developing millennial surveys and holding millennial focus groups to ascertain what motivates millennials to move to rural communities. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, Pam Schallhorn. Pam, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, you're welcome, Nancy. And I want to thank Nancy Ouedraogo and also my colleague, Dr. Lori George, who is in the next office, who's been helping me with technical issues this morning. Lori will also be reading out your questions to me after the presentation. And as Nancy said, feel free to put them in the chat box at any time. But we will get to those as soon as we get finished here. As I start today, I looked at the registrations, and there were 189 registered. We have 80 on board right now, but I see they're coming on as we speak. But we have over 27 states represented in those registrations, so I know that this particular issue, attracting and retaining youth to rural communities, is nationwide. In fact, some of the studies that I have read have actually been in rural Europe. So it is not just Illinois. It's not just one state in particular, but rural areas, rural communities, rural counties across the United States have the same problems. Attracting these young people, getting them to return after they go to college. So we pretty much know what the problem is, or most of us do. If you don't, I'm going to let you know that the youth have been leaving rural communities at an alarming rate. In fact, I'll show you some numbers in just a few minutes. Scholars and researchers call this the hollowing out of rural America. This problem has actually been occurring for over a decade now. I've been working with this issue for about 3 years in South Central Illinois, but I do know part of what I'm going to talk about today came from a study that's been going on for over a decade, so it's not a new problem. On this next slide, I'm able to hear someone. Tom, you think you might be able to mute them for me? Thank you. This chart actually came out of a study by Norm Walzer and Brian Hager, who are up in the Center for Political Studies at Northern Illinois University. It's very difficult, and many of you out there may know this, it's quite difficult to find numbers, find data for rural America, for rural Illinois, for rural communities. But these two did a fantastic job pulling out some numbers for Illinois, rural Illinois, to show the changes from 2000 to 2010, in 2000 to 2000 or 2010 to 2016. What I'm going to do though, and if anyone needs a PDF of the file or of this presentation, they're going to be putting my email address in the chat box here pretty soon. So feel free to email me, or maybe Nancy will be able to send it out as well. But I will have a PDF of the presentation so you can look at these charts and some of the references later when you have time. But let's take a look at what that chart just said to us. It's telling us that rural population in Illinois between 2000 and 2016 dropped by 81,046 young people or people. Actually, if we go back, I didn't put it on there, but the total rural population in Illinois in 2016 was 1,477. So you can see that this number of 81,000 is significant enough. But then we look, and under age 44 dropped by 157,167. People from the ages 44 to 64, it increased to 49,000, and age 64 and over increased by 26,500. Now, it is sort of a moving target when you're trying to analyze data in regards to age, because obviously, and now I'm going to let you know I am a baby boomer. So in 2000, based on the numbers we're looking at, I was 46. Now I'm 63. So I'm falling into another category. But as with Illinois, I have seen other data that shows me that all over the United States, our average age is increasing. And it's not just that baby boomers are getting older. It's the fact that those under 44, under 20 are moving away from rural communities, and they're not returning. So who is the millennial? Based on the research I have right now, they're about between the ages of 20 and 35. Now, there's different definitions. Some would make them 19 to 34, others would make them 21 to 36. But let's just say their average age is somewhere between 20 and 35. They're adventurous, creative. They love social contact. Although some people think that they're stuck on their iPhones, they do like to interact with other people their own age. Millennials are definitely the entrepreneurial generation. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. And I see them, and so do other researchers, as victims of the Great Recession. Unlike the baby boomers who were able pretty much to get out of college back in the 70s and 80s and go straight into the job market, many of these millennials spent years after college not being able to even get any job because they hit or got out of college right in 2006, 2007 as that Great Recession started. The good news, though, is based on a recent research back in 2014, the millennials actually hit a total of 78 million people, more than the baby boomers at the peak. Of those, 23% want to live in small towns and rural areas, and this is great. This is wonderful news because actually I was just looking at some research the other day, which I have here, and it indicated that right now in America, 17% of Americans live in rural areas. But this study was projecting that by 2050, when the millennials turn 69, if they can, any of them are online and can imagine that, there will only be 11% of the people living in rural areas in America. So if there's 23% right now of those millennials who would like to live in a small town or rural area or are living there, then I think it's even more imperative that we start looking at ways to try to attract these young people either back to the communities or make sure that our community development and economic development policies take into consideration their needs. I want to first give some credit to Schroeder. who's the director of Youth Engagement Center for Rural Entrepreneurship. He is out in Nebraska. Over the last 13 years, Craig and his group has been doing a lot of surveys of millennials, and I took some of these strategies from him, but I have to be honest with you. These strategies are based on not only his research, but others' research, and then some that I've been doing over the last 3 years with Washington County, Illinois, and Jefferson County, Illinois. The number one strategy, the first one, and you know, I can't see any of you, but I can imagine that you're all shaking your head going, that's right, we need high-speed internet. We need the best high-speed internet. And it's true. Now, you're going to see in a minute that in Jefferson County Development Corp, I helped them do a survey in January and February of this year, and we just held some millennial focus groups last month. High-speed internet didn't come in at number one. It came in at number two. But that's because in Mount Vernon, Illinois, which is located in Jefferson County, their high-speed internet is great. I happen to live here. I stream my TV. I have internet at home. We have great internet in the office. So they've sort of gotten an opportunity to check that off. But for many small communities, high-speed internet is a huge issue. And if you're thinking about sitting down and putting together some planning committees in your communities to look out at what kind of things you need, I would definitely say you want to at least have a good long brainstorming session about this. High-speed internet is important because youth get long-distance learning opportunities through high-speed internet. They also love to do internet-based business opportunities. I have a young friend here who's under 30 in Jefferson County, and she just went to work for an organization called TAPS. She actually takes family members of of military personnel that died overseas. She takes them on trips. Her last one was to Machu Picchu, and she had a great time, but she actually has to work from her home, and she's in a rural area, and her internet speed is not that great. And I think if we're going to want to keep her, we're going to have to make sure, or the communities near her are going to have to make sure that she has that opportunity. Also, millennials consider internet the staple. I know some people maybe that are baby boomers or even part of the silent generation, which are those that are, I think they're over 75 now, may never have even used the internet, still aren't really using it a lot. But for a millennial, it is a staple. They need it. That's how they get their TV, their education. It's how they run their businesses. They're not going to be living in a rural community that doesn't have at least good to great high-speed internet. Number two, the strategy number two, invest in your youth priorities. And, you know, I'm going to skip right to the bottom of this slide is if you're going to invest in youth priorities, the first thing you need to do is know what those youth priorities are. And I'm saying be sure you ask them what they want. I think it's very difficult, especially from my perspective as a baby boomer that started doing economic development, community development back in the 1980s, whether or not I would be able to develop a youth priority that would really attract millennials. Well, I'm not going to say I'd be very good at that. I'd be doing something maybe that would attract myself. So the best thing to do is ask them. They are very business-minded. They place a great value on social contacts. So they like to have what they call third spaces. For those of you who have never heard of a third space, it's something that's not home and it's not work. It's a place they can hang out. They like to be able to play cards, listen to music, and talk with their friends. Some obvious examples of this, or maybe not so obvious, internet cafes, microbreweries, and other recreational opportunities for them. And again, as I mentioned, if you're not sure which investments to make, ask your youth. But if you're thinking right now, well, we're thinking about building a rec center, or we're trying to attract more businesses to our downtown, these are the types of places that you want to put together. I will say that one of the things comes up a lot when I'm doing millennial focus groups is they don't like the quintessential rural bar. Now, for some communities, that's a local gathering place, but if there are a lot of people that come every night, drink there every night, and they're older, a lot of times millennials are not going to feel comfortable there. And I know sometimes that's hard for some of us to deal with because it's a culture that we're used to in a rural community. It is not something that is going to attract millennials back to your community, unless you've set up something to where it's a place where they can hang out, play cards, listen to music, and talk to their friends. They like their own space. Strategy number 3, provide economic opportunities through entrepreneurship. As I mentioned before, millennials are the entrepreneurial generation. They want to start their own business. In fact, a study that is actually in the bibliography that 70% want their own business and 17% already have one. And now that 17% number is probably about 2 years old, so I wouldn't doubt that there are even more that have their own businesses, not just online businesses, but I'm going to give you an example of a millennial business in a rural community near me in just a minute. They want to live in a community that supports its local businesses. You're going to see also in a minute that in Jefferson County, a Development Corp survey, that the number one thing is a community that supports its local business. They like small businesses. They like living in communities that appreciate their small businesses. This is what the research is telling us, and yet I see more and more rural areas, especially city councils and local government bodies, and I realize they're interested in building sales tax for their communities, but they're continuing to open more and more corporate stores along the highway, and they're ignoring their downtowns, and they're ignoring their small businesses. Even in Illinois, a lot of our small business development centers were closed over the last couple of years. This is not the direction we want to be going. We need to focus on more small businesses and giving these young people an opportunity to not only come back to their communities, but to create businesses that will last, businesses that will hire more employees. They also want entrepreneurial education sooner, or they want it early. They want it sooner the better. In Illinois, I will give them one thumbs up here, and that is that they have created a program statewide called CEO. It stands for Creating Entrepreneurial Opportunities. It's actually a program that is given in the high schools, and hopefully this is going to build future entrepreneurs and small business owners. The thing is, though, is that there's still the option that these people could want to move away from the rural community, take their businesses to the metropolitan areas, and again, we'd still be losing them. So you still have to go back and think about, are we appreciating our small businesses? Are we working on getting better internet? And are we asking our millennials what it is they want? These are some signs of an entrepreneurial culture that I took from a study. Some of you may already have them. If not, you may want to think about them. Public markets, shared workspaces, incentives for your small businesses, buy local campaigns, marketing assistance, and entrepreneur competitions. Let's take a look now at an actual startup business that I just got to meet the CEO, Ashley Kirshner. I'm guessing, I'm trying to remember, I hate to guess, but I think Ashley is about 25 or 26 years old. I know she is under 30 for sure. She actually got a 2-year degree at a community college in Kaskaskia College, which is in Centralia, Illinois. About dead center in the state. And she actually opened the business in Nashville, Illinois, which is a population of 3,258. Now, Nashville is in Washington County, which is the first county that asked me and was concerned about millennials leaving. So I'm really excited that this is where this business was started at. And Washington County also does not have a Walmart, and they are a community well known, or Nashville is a community well known for supporting its small businesses. In fact, it probably has one of the healthiest downtown business districts that you're going to find in a town of less than 4,000 in the state of Illinois. There might be a few others, but I know Nashville is going to rank way up there if they're not the top one. So anyway, Print Crazy in Nashville, Illinois. As you can see, we've got Ashley here, who's the CEO, and yes, this is her business uniform. For some of you that are baby boomers and older and come from a more traditional, dress for success attitude of wearing business suits and ties, and for, me as a businesswoman and a banker in the 80s, it was, heels and nylons and all that. That's not the way they dress at Print Crazy in Nashville. Actually was dressed in a pair of Birkenstocks and blue jean shorts. And here on the right, you can also see her staff, which they have these pictures painted on the doors. It's a great, very relaxed atmosphere, but they are doing so well that they are actually going to do a pretty large expansion here very quickly, or very soon. Here you're going to notice that they have a shared workspace. Okay, and you can see, and of course they are in the design business, so you're going to see maybe a little bit more unique, creative things that you might see in, even if it was another millennial. But I think she started this business, I'm going to say 2 or 3 years ago. Her father helped her. He helped her finance the business initially, but she is going it on her own from almost the get-go. But again, a shared workspace. They don't have the individual cubicles or offices like you see in some traditional businesses. And if you are someone who owns a business and is thinking, why am I not being able to get millennials to come to work for me, keep in mind that this is the kind of environment that they like to work in. They enjoy bouncing ideas off of each other. They're a little bit more interactive, I think, than maybe some of the other generations were or are. Yes, this is a purple garage floor. They actually do decals for trucks as well as signage and other design work, and this is their garage. And they do have this purple floor. It's absolutely gorgeous. They keep it just immaculate in there, and it's a very unique shop. But they do care about profits. If anybody's thinking that just because they have shared workspace and wear Birkenstocks to work, that doesn't mean that they are not interested in making a profit. They might display their weekly sales reports a little differently than the way we did in the past, but they are certainly interested in making enough money. I think they right now have 7 or 8 employees. Most of them are professional designers, but I noticed that they not only do the design work, a lot of them also do or work together to get projects done and out. And they have been building their sales, and as I mentioned, they expect to do a very large expansion. I don't know the exact square foot, but it's probably going to double the size of their current facility. Okay, we're on to strategy number 4, and that's to actively engage and consult youth. This is critically important. If you want to know what they think, you need to ask them. Don't assume you know what they want. And if you're sitting in a meeting and you're doing community development or economic development or anything in your community, you look around and everybody at that table is over 60. You don't have the right group to work with. You need young people in these committees. You need to find out what they want. You want first of all, to make sure they know that you want them to stay. I just held a millennial focus group the other day, and that's what they said is they need to be asked. They're not going to know. They're not going to try to push their way into a county board meeting. They're not going to try to push their way into a city council meeting. They may not even volunteer for any of these things because they don't know, and because there's so few millennials left in some of these communities that they don't even know what's going on. They're still young. They're working full time. They're thinking about starting a family. You need to let those millennials and those young people know that you want them to stay. You want to make sure they know that their opinions and ideas matter, and you want to include them in community planning and local government any way you can. Now, for Washington County, when they said they were concerned about millennials leaving, not having enough people, young people, participating in the community, and the other thing too is think about the schools, all these communities that are building new schools, and if these millennials continue to leave, what's going to happen? So we started a millennial survey and focus group, and now I helped them develop that survey, and then they would give the survey, and then I would help them analyze the data. We also held the focus groups, and if anyone is interested in that survey, we are in the process here with the University of Illinois Extension putting together some community surveys out online, and some of them are already out there, I believe. Nancy could tell you more about that at the end of the presentation. But as soon as I can get this to a generic format, I will also be putting the Millennial Survey out there. But if you see my email in the chat box, which I think Lori will put that out there, you are more than welcome to email me, and I will make sure you get a copy of that Millennial Survey as soon as I have a generic one prepared. But again, actively engage and consult youth. Take a look at your committees, take a look at your organizations, even your chambers of commerce and others. Do you have any youth represented in those on those committees, in those organizations? I have to tell you, I've gone to several committee meetings. In fact, when we started out in Washington County, that's why they identified it. It was the Washington County Planning Commission. The youngest person at the table was 54 years old. So how can we plan for what people are going to need in 20 years? You know, it really is important to get them involved. Okay, this is the Millennial Survey that Jefferson County Development Corp did. I'm actually going to, one of our staff members here at Extension put together this infographic for us that we could present it to city councils and county boards. We haven't done that yet. We're getting there. Why I'm turning to the second page is because one of the most exciting things about this was the #1 place they wanted to live, where they wanted more housing at, was downtown living in Mount Vernon. And if you give me a minute, I will get to another slide that's going to talk about density. It's a research that's been going on. The St. Louis Federal Reserve has been doing this research, and they have found that millennials, or this particular group of young people, like density. And density is basically what you see in more metropolitan areas in their downtowns with the loft apartments and things like that. But I'll get a little bit more to that. But I just wanted to show you that in Jefferson County, a community that supports its small business was #1. Great high-speed internet was #2. More focus and opportunity for young entrepreneurs to start small businesses was #3. And then we had actually not only gave them several choices, but we allowed them to we had a lot of open-ended questions. It took a while to read through the survey with 298 responding to the survey, but to me it's really worth it. If you want to know what they think, you can't just give them a list. I mean, you want to make sure you know what your millennials want, what the young people want. And just to let you know, back up just a bit, with the surveys, they either had to live in the county now, work in the county or they once lived in the county in order for them to fill out this survey. When we did the Washington County Millennial focus groups, we actually had 2 young people from Chicago Skyping in to talk to us about how, and both of them would have liked to have moved back, but having the professional opportunities to come back was a little difficult for them at the moment. But I have a feeling if they really felt wanted, if they could find the opportunity, or possibly even be in a position to start their own business, they would have come back very quickly. Okay, we're going to talk about marketing your community to attract young people. This is strategy number 5. What I want to talk about here is the research or the studies have suggested that it's easier to get someone who grew up in your rural area or in your small town back than it is to possibly attract someone living in St. Louis that grew up in St. Louis to move back to your rural area. Now, we've already determined that 23% of the young people in the United States would like to live in a rural area, but still I think that it's easier to market to those that maybe went to high school, grade school, lived in your town all their lives, then went away to college but have not yet come back. So if you're going to sit down and you're going to start a marketing plan or develop a marketing plan and maybe even hire someone to start to market to get these people back, which I am highly recommending you do, you really need to think about maybe finding a way to find out who these people are, who the young people were that have left and not yet come back. But also take a look at the young people that you have in your community right now and make sure that whatever financial decisions or decisions you're making for your community, include them in the process so that you don't do something that would make it less attractive for them to stay and more attractive for them to move to, say, a larger metropolitan statistical area. Let's see, when we're talking about getting those young people back, there's an example I want to give you before I go through these, and it's something I want to make sure I say, and I don't have it exactly written down, but the research is saying that you have better luck getting someone to come back to your community than someone from the outside. So let's just stop for a minute and think about this. You saw how many millennials were leaving, how many young people were leaving, and how this demographics is changing. If it's easier to bring someone back that grew up here, grew up in your community, what happens if you don't bring them back now? What happens when you miss this generation? I told you this has been an issue for a decade. How much longer do we have? Now, millennials are having their children later in life. They're starting their families later in life, in part because they had this problem with the recession when they first got out of school. But if we don't bring them back now and their children don't grow up here, then who are you going to be able to bring back in 20 years? I mean, are they going to want to come back to a place that, say, for instance, they went once a year for a week to see their grandparents? Probably not. So in my opinion, the opportunity to implement these strategies in your community, to work on this, to get these millennials involved, to get them the things they need in your community, the clock's ticking. I don't really think we have much more than about 5 or 10 years, and unless there's something that I can't foresee, none of the researchers can foresee, I don't see these young people's children coming back if they don't grow up in a rural area to begin with. Again, marketing your community, millennials are most likely to return home to towns after they've had their first child. I'm suggesting you create an actual marketing plan, and that's what the research is saying, geared toward attracting young people, especially those that grew up in your town. And truthfully, just an aside, that if you're going to have someone market this plan, I would think about hiring a millennial or having a group of millennials to help you with this marketing plan. Millennials that already live there, maybe some of them that have a background in marketing. Because, for instance, millennials like the news, but they like it digital and short. Newspapers and TV, traditional TV, will not reach them. I stream my TV, so I see no commercials at all. They're not going to see a lot on the local news if they're streaming their TV or their news. Market your small business friendliness if you've got it. If you don't, then you need to start thinking about supporting those small businesses. And then they like peer-to-peer recommendations. We know, as anyone that's been in marketing for a long time knows, that your most power comes from word of mouth. Well, it's not necessarily word of mouth all the time. Sometimes it's via Facebook or some other social media. But those young people telling other young people how great it is to live in your community. Hashtag come live here. Hashtag come live in Mount Vernon. That is really critical if they know that things are going on. And I do know that as we've started some of these surveys and just some of these focus groups, that I think young people are thinking, hey, yay, they're listening to us. Now we can tell our friends this is a pretty cool place to come. Yeah, internet's great. This is a great place. If you've got an online business, you can live anywhere. So live here. I really do think, though, you need to do some planning. It needs to be in your 10-year plans and 5-year plans. And if you're in economic development or community development, or even on a city council or a chamber of commerce, you need to actually sit down and think about how you're going to attract them. And again, make sure that they're in the discussion. This is the reason they're returning home, is so that they can have parents closer to them. Cost of daycare in Chicago is $21,000 a year. They do feel, based on the surveys, that you have better schools in rural areas. They can know their friends and neighbors. They have opportunities to play sports. Their kids like to ride bikes. They have opportunities to volunteer and make a difference. And I keep hearing the word over and over again, small towns are safer. So there's a lot of reasons they would love to come back to your community. It's just you need to get out there and successfully market it, and also make sure that you have things like those third places, those cafes, those microbreweries, those third places that they can hang out with their friends. We were talking about density, and I'm just going to say a couple more things about this. Density means keeping your neighborhoods walkable, having traditional town centers that millennials say are key to making a community a desirable place to live. Remember the Jefferson County Development Corp, their survey indicated that the number one thing is they wanted to have more housing in downtown. They wanted the loft apartments. They want people grouped together. This is how they prefer to live. Conclusion, the dollars and cents. Most of you may be aware, but if you are not, that as these young people are leaving, it has had an impact on both your community's income and educational levels. So it's a much more than just not having as many young people. But I do have a couple questions here that I want you to think about when you're thinking about millennials and you're deciding whether or not your community actually needs to do a millennial survey or millennial focus groups, or do a marketing plan focused on millennials. Number one, who will attend your schools? In 10 years, who will be attending your schools? If these millennials don't come back, if they continue to leave, they don't have their children here, they don't raise their children in a rural community, who's going to attend those schools? And for Mount Vernon, Illinois, that is a key question, because they just built a brand new high school. Who will take over your leadership positions in your community? Who's going to be on your county board, your city council? And what happens to a rural community if you cannot get enough people to run for your county board or city council. I don't know about anyone that's listening to this presentation, but I do know that around this area there are several small communities, most of them under 1,000 or 2,000 people, that cannot even get people to run for their county boards or town councils. And some of them are even thinking of the opportunities or the possibility of unincorporating, leaving that city structure or town structure behind, and then just falling back into the county roles as though they were just rural property outside in the country. This can be devastating. Water systems, sewage systems, so many changes, and losing these rural communities along the way. Also, when you sit down to talk about it, think about it. What's the long-term impact? What long-term impact will millennials or young people leaving, or those under 18 not growing up in your community, what's the long-term impact on your community? I think you're going to see that there is value in developing a marketing plan, including the millennials, making sure that you're building things for them, and not just trying to replicate or continually do what we've done in the past. Economic development, we just can't do it like it's the 1980s anymore. I think Lori will be adding in the chat box my email, but it's also here on this slide. If you are on the phone, and I know some of you are, I'm going to give you this email address, because if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box now. But if you think of something later, or if you want to have that generic survey as soon as I have time to get it whittled down, my email address is P as in Pam, PSCHA2. So that's P, S as in Sam, C as in cat, H as in Henry, A as in apple, the number 2, at illinois.edu, and Illinois is all spelled out, illinois.edu. So for those of you on the phone, that is my email address. I'd love to hear from you. I realize that there is a potential of participants from over 27 states in the United States, and I'd be happy to share any information I have. Lori, do we have any questions?
We do have two.
Okay.
First one is from Julie Rogers. Are there any great examples of marketing plans geared to, quote, bringing them home, unquote?
Good question, and I was kind of thinking you might be asking me that. The thing is that I do not have any examples of planning packages here in Illinois yet. I've been working on this for 3 years, and over the last 2 years I've helped with 2 surveys and 3 focus groups. But I do know that there are a couple of organizations out there, according to Craig Schroeder, that I mentioned, that he's the one that's been doing the surveys for almost a decade now. He's telling me there is a place called Brookfield Area Growth Partnership in Brookfield, Missouri. If you're anywhere near Brookfield, Missouri, he recommended that a Becky Cleveland from Brookfield Area Growth Partnership has been doing probably for the last decade, and he feels that these communities, there's 3 of them, have been pretty successful in planning and bringing millennials back to their communities. So Brookfield, Missouri. The second one is Holt County, Nebraska, and let's see, it's ONeill, Nebraska, and it's a Nicole Sedlicott. I can't pronounce her last name, but if you want to email me, or maybe I could give this to Lori and she could put this in the chat box. She's an economic development specialist in ONeill, Nebraska, but he's saying that Holt County, Nebraska has done a lot of work. Again, Atwood, Kansas is the last one. So this is Nebraska, Missouri, and Kansas. And it's Atwood, Kansas. It's a Chris Sramek, and he is an Atwood community leader. Right now, that's all I have. I'm sorry I don't have more research for you on it, but if you want to email me, I can also give you their email addresses, and make sure that you can get in contact with them and maybe get some actual plans. But yet I have not worked with a community that's put together a formalized plan. Next question.
Okay. How do you ensure that you have downtown development that is still affordable?
How do you ensure you have downtown development? Are they talking about housing?
Well, they didn't say. They did not specify. They just were wondering how you can ensure that downtown development is still affordable.
Okay, I'm just gonna guess they're talking about housing, and if I'm not, then maybe they'll put it in the chat box to clarify that. That question's been asked a lot when I talk about developing loft apartments in downtown rural areas. First of all, millennials live quite differently than other generations have. First of all, a lot of them do not even head households yet. So let's say that you're renovating apartments or loft apartments in a downtown, and you feel like you have to charge between, say, $800 and $1,200 a month. You're probably going to find that a lot of these young people will share that apartment. You'll have 3 millennials living in a $1,200 a month apartment paying $400 a piece. I don't remember the exact figure, but less than half of the millennials who are now between 20 and 36, I think it was only around 38% if I remember right, actually are head of household. They're either still living at home or they're sharing apartments or homes with other people. So hopefully that answers their question.
Yes, it was housing.
Okay.
Next one. It appears that there is a lot of residential rural real estate on the markets. How do you overcome the disconnect of numerous properties that do not meet millennial expectations, but they're taking up space?
Yeah, actually this is going to be a growing problem, especially as these populations are declining, because almost every rural population is declining. And you know, honestly, I don't have an easy answer for that. I do know that from the studies of the focus groups and surveys that I've either seen or done is that it is hard to supply the kind of housing that young people are used to when they're in metropolitan statistical areas. So, you know, honestly, I don't have an answer for that. I think that I do know one thing, though. When I talked to the last focus group and said something about the houses that were built in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, a lot of them are the 3-bedroom ranch with 2 baths. They seem to be satisfied with that. They're just saying that most of the housing stock is so in such bad shape that it takes so much to renovate it. I do know around Mount Vernon there's some people that are actually renovating and flipping these houses so that it's making them more attractive to the young people, but I know that's a big order when you're talking about rural properties. Best I could do on that one, Lori.
Okay. What is the role of schools in attracting rural youth to rural communities?
I think schools are, I mean, that is one of the things they're looking at, is the safety and the good schools. They're in their minds, the majority of them, based on the research and the surveys, in their minds, these schools are good. I mean, they're safer. They have, they're generally the ratio teacher to student is better. The last focus group did talk a little bit about some of the quality of the instructors. Right now, it's sort of even. They're not saying that they're better or worse, but you really want to keep good quality instructors and teachers in your schools. But the schools are very important. The opportunity to be able to, you know, either take the bus or ride their bicycle to school is huge. Although I do know that some smaller communities, like under 1,000 people, that used to have high schools and grade schools no longer do. But I do know also, especially in rural Illinois, that a lot of places have some newer regional high schools and schools that are doing quite well. So I do think it's really critical. Your school's a very critical part of selling because they're going to bring their children back and they want their children to have good educations.
And the second part was, do you know of schools who are doing a good job of helping the young people develop the skills to live in a rural community? He said the CEO program is one. Are there others?
Yeah, just before I answer that, Nancy, do you want to chime in and ask people if they do this poll for us?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to quickly say thanks for continuing to put your questions in the chat box, and thanks to Pam for addressing those questions. But if you're not engaging in the Q&A, here's a way to sound in for us on whether you felt that today's program increased your knowledge around strategies for attracting and retaining youth in small or rural communities. So let us know, and we'll leave this up for a couple of minutes so you can tell us, and I'll turn it back over to the Q&A. Thank you.
On the situation with the school, we were talking about if I had any examples of great schools that are doing a good job of teaching. And again, I'm not connected directly to K through 12 education. I work much more with adults, or my youngest are this millennial group, 20 to 36. Although I am going to be giving a presentation for the CEO group up in Greenville, Illinois, at the end of the month. So I'm looking forward to working with people under 20 now, which is that next generation that's coming up. What I can say is that the studies that I have read and the information that I have read is right now millennials still look at education in the rural areas as being as good or better than what they're getting in large metropolitan areas. And of course, I think a lot of that has to do with safety and, as I mentioned, the teacher to student ratio. I don't have much more to say as far as do I know of a school that's doing a fantastic job. I can't say that. I haven't looked at their numbers. So
there were a couple of suggestions, one from Steve Groner, maybe housing renovation incentives for new owners as a way to differentiate.
Very possible. You could look at financial incentives, although I do know, I want to say it was the state of Kansas, maybe someone out there remembers or knows that there was a governor who actually put in some financial incentives to try to lure millennials back. I don't think his had to do with housing. I think they had more to do with paying off their student loans or a portion of their student loans. As far as I know, that program was not hugely successful. I think where you're going to find the real pull for these young people is to come back and be close to family and friends, make sure that they have, and if you're going to do a marketing plan and you're going to market out to them, if you have any professional jobs that are available, jobs that require college degrees, or make sure that these young people that are out of town know about these opportunities so that they could move in. That's another thing that's actually squeezing them right now, is because baby boomers are staying in the workforce a lot longer than the generation before them. We're not retiring nearly as young. But what I do talk to millennials about is, for some reason, the baby boomers are going to work till they die. Not sure how we grab that value. Unlike the generation before us, they decided that retiring was a good thing, and I don't think there's really anything wrong with that, but I know baby boomers want to work till they die. This can be hard, opening up professional positions. I just tell baby boomers to please keep that in mind and make sure that if one of your baby boomers retires, to get them something to do, or they'll find something. And also for the older generation, if they have opportunities to retire and open a job but still have something else for themselves to do if they're in a financial position, that can be very helpful. I know it's hard. I'm not saying that I want to retire right away, but certainly looking for opportunities for young people to take over professional businesses or positions, or get involved in businesses. But again, just getting them involved in community development, economic development, the planning, knowing that they are heard, knowing that you value them, you're going to keep them, and also hopefully they're going to recommend others to come in. And if you're really lucky, you're going to get someone like Ashley that I just showed you that started Print Crazy, and she's going to hire 6 other designers who are all under 30, and build more jobs for your community that fit these young people, because I know she is attracting people back or encouraging people to stay. So Nashville's very lucky to have that business.
A couple of other ideas from Stephen Hennis is maybe recruiting millennials to focus groups, or setting up school partnerships for students to provide a youth voice at that point. So.
Sounds good. Thank you, Steve. And Steve is actually one of my colleagues. For any of you in Illinois, I am a community and economic development educator for the University of Illinois Extension. There are 10 other CED educators across the state. I also know that other states have CED educators. If you have a question, if you would like to get some more assistance on this, call your local extension office and ask them where your closest community and economic development educator is. I think in other states they might call them community development educators, but I think you're going to find the majority of us are in a position to help you and your community, your rural community, put together a plan, help you with any questions, and also maybe get you some data or research that's available in our particular states. And Lori, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is an extension program in all 50 states, correct?
I believe there is, yes.
Yes. Okay.
Land-grant university, yes.
Yeah, we are all any land-grant university will be designated with an extension program. So contact your extension office. They may not have one in your particular county, or even in what they call units, which can be 3 to 5 counties. But they will probably have a couple of them across the state. And please make sure you utilize that asset.
We do have a couple of more questions if you have.
Okay. Quick, yeah, and I understand people are leaving, that's fine, but those of you that have questions, I'd be happy to stay and answer. Go ahead, Lori.
What effect do big box stores have on small town attractiveness to millennials?
That's a double-edged sword. They want them, but they also appreciate small businesses. So they get a little tired of corporate stores, but I think the corporate stores most of them are complaining about are actually restaurants. They get tired of the fact that all they have are McDonald's and Hardee's, and they would like to see some locally grown restaurants. But the retail is double-edged because they do like to have that retail. They like to have a Kohl's. They like to have some of these shops. But again, with millennials, I think they're even more attuned to living in a rural area than some of us, because I would say now maybe up to 90%, I haven't seen the numbers, but I know what the millennials around here are doing. 90% of what they buy is online anyway. So as long as you got good internet, the big box stores probably aren't going to have as much of an impact on them. Next question, Lori.
This is from Kelly Henwood. Do you find the direct link between active and thriving rural agricultural communities and retention of young families?
Oh, yes, I do. I think that if you're talking about activity, vitality, you're talking about a rural community that's got life and it's moving forward, you're probably going to find that they're keeping their millennials, and the millennials are driving that. I really feel that for a woman that's 63, I'm pretty high energy, but I still know that these younger people have the energy, and we need to harness that. We need to let them in, let them use it, and if they're not there, we need them back. I worked with an organization, just a quick example. It was the Business Women's and Professional group in Centralia, Illinois. They had me in to give this presentation. Their board, their president, vice president, they were all, actually, I think most of them were over 70. But there were a few millennials in the room. I said, these are your resources, these are your assets. In fact, I even had everyone under 50 stand up, because there's so few millennials that you do have a few between 40 and 50 as well. Now, I received an email saying that at their last election, everyone on the board has changed and they're all under 40. But I convince these women that these are, let these young people in. They've got the energy, but they want to have a say in what maybe it's a traditional event they do. They want to have a say in how it's run. And then they're going to use their energy and their input. I really think that organization has been revived by that, and it will probably stay around longer and be more successful because they've allowed those millennials to take over some of those leadership positions. Anything else, Lori?
Nope, that was the last question.
Okay, well, we're at 1:05. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate it. Nancy, do you have anything to say before I say goodbye?
I just want to say thank you to the participants for attending this LGE webinar. I went ahead and pasted some information in the chat box concerning our archives, which is where the recording of this webinar is going to be posted within 2 to 3 business days, and a little bit of information about our upcoming webinar next month, which is October 26th, and it's entitled Age-Friendly Initiatives, Making Communities Livable for All Ages. Thanks again for attending. Thank you very much, Pam, as well, for presenting.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for asking me, Nancy. You have a great day. Bye now, everyone.
Thank you.